You might have heard on the news recently about asylum seekers and refugees being locked up in a hotel in Australia for 9 years. And you probably heard this because of Novak Djokovic, the #1 world tennis player, being locked up there for a few days as well. Let's sit on the fence and look at both sides of this policy and see whether it's fair or not. The policy that the current Australian government holds is that any asylum seekers who come here by boat, they are to be detained and never allowed to settle permanently here. They are to be detained in detention, which currently could be any number of hotels in Australia, or in offshore detention, in detention centres here in Australia, until we find a place for them. And some Pacific nation countries have agreed to take some refugees, and New Zealand has agreed to take some, and America has taken some. That might seem a really odd position and argument to have, that we're not going to take these refugees, but it's fine to offload them to these other countries who'll take them. But let's set aside that strange position for the moment and look at the two central reasons why the government adopts this policy. First is to do with terrorism, and the second is to do with jumping the queue, deterrence. The risk of terrorism isn't really an explicitly stated reason for border policy on this issue, but it is obviously there. And that is, if we lock them up for a while, this is a deterrent to would-be terrorists to come here, and in the meantime we can discover whether they're a terrorist threat. If they are indeed a terrorist threat, how many years before a terrorist thinks, that country is not worth going to blow it up and kill anybody there, because I have to spend a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years in detention? It's probably after a couple of years, you would think that probably deters any terrorists from coming here. How long do we need to find out whether someone that we've detained is a terrorist? Well, you would think that a year is enough to interview them and find out about what happened in their homeland and their background. So you'd think if the reason was just for terrorist threat, that after a couple of years, the deterrence to terrorists and finding out whether someone's a terrorist would probably be enough. The other more explicitly stated reason is that there are a lot of people wanting to come to this country already, and they have done a lot of study and filled out forms and waited in line and waited for a long time. And here are these people jumping in boats, desperate to get here, and they get ahead of them. If we were to settle them and we're only allowing a certain number of people in every year, then that makes those people who've been waiting legitimately have to wait longer. Well, you may be someone who argues that everyone should be allowed to come here at any time. If you do, you'd really have to say how the threat to economically, environment and socially, there's no risk of that. Let's just for a moment say that we can't allow anyone to come in at any time, and we should have some kind of a cap to how many per year and some kind of way of working out who should go before whom. Now, certainly the idea at first hearing that someone is waiting a long time and doing a lot of work to get here, another one just gets here easily, it doesn't seem fair. But we also have to consider these people who come here by boat at risk of dying by boat. A lot of them do die by boat. It must be really desperate for them. And if it's really desperate for them and really terrible in their country, that is also an ethical criteria for allowing them to be not put at the back of the queue too far back. in terms of like many, many years, in terms of, and insofar as settling him, one would think. The deterrence factor here, which is the central argument that government is using, that we must not let them stay here, otherwise others will keep coming here by boat. If we don't ever let them settle here, none will come here by boat. Well, firstly, if there are smugglers lying to people, they will try to come here anyway. If they're lying to them about they're not going to be deterred, it'd be easy to get into the country. And even if you had them locked up for 20 years, that wouldn't deter anyone else from coming. As for those, the rest of them who do know they could be locked up, but they're prepared to come here and get locked up anyway in order to be free in Australia, I ask you to imagine that you are living in an unbearable country with war all the time. You can't be who you are, no freedom of speech. Your female family members can't be anything but a servant and a wife, and that's it. Lots of things that you can't bear. You have to go to another country, New Zealand, Japan, Australia, and you find out Australia, you're going to be locked up for several years. Are you going to go there? No, you're not. For me, even 1 year is going to be too much. Certainly 2 years. But these asylum seekers have been locked up for 9 years in the particular hotel that we see in the news. Now, once we get past 2 or 3 years, how is it for you? Is that, if you're wanting to go to another country, is that enough deterrence for you? It seems rather illogical to have them locked up continually for that amount of time. If it's to deter, and if it's to find out if they're a terrorist, because they've had enough time to find out whether they're a terrorist, and to deter terrorists. To deter queue jumpers, to deter terrorists, and to find out if they're a terrorist. A couple of years seems enough. On the matter of them, keeping them locked up until they find another country for them to settle in, these people are suffering mentally, emotionally, their health, socially, psychologically. They're getting mental health conditions. Some of them are killing themselves. It's really harsh for them. We need to take that into account. And the ethical argument for taking responsibility comes here. We must take responsibility that we haven't been able to find out if they're a terrorist threat yet or not. If they are a terrorist threat, we can send them back to their country or charge them here, send them to another country that shares their beliefs, and maybe have some exchange program. If we can't find out they're a terrorist threat, let's take responsibility for that. Let's take responsibility for the suffering they're feeling. Let's take responsibility that we've already provided a significant number of years of deterrence. Let's take responsibility that we haven't found another country yet who's been willing to settle them. And the argument for letting them go into the community at very small risk of them being a threat to us, they've already provided a deterrence after a couple of years. If we use an argument of human rights and duty, we really have a duty to their well-being, to their dignity, to using virtues of character, compassion and care and empathy. The greatest good argument is one the government is using here, benefiting the whole of Australia versus a small number. But that's only if there are valued arguments against that small number. And after a couple of years, 3 years, we're seeing those arguments wear thin. If you have anything to say on this, you agree or disagree, or you just have spotted a hole in what I'm saying, or you want to say anything at all, you're most welcome to do so. Comment below in the comments section politely. Thank you very much, and we're all philosophers who want to know the truth.